All right. Meaghan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Do you mind just introducing yourself, talking about Cleo, talking about what you do there?
Yeah, definitely. So Cleo is an end-to-end caregiving platform, and we're really here to support from any, parenting caregiving questions you have from the very beginning of that family planning phase all the way up through caregiving for an adult loved one. And what I do at Cleo is that I oversee our commercial operations department, which includes everything from pipeline reporting, implementations, and probably about a million other things in between. And it is truly, I think, the most fun job I've had over the course of my career, and I'm super excited to be here.
I'm Ibby Syed.
I'm Sean Collins.
And this is Numbers and Narratives.
And could you give just a little bit of context on like Cleo as a company? Like how big is the team? What sort of, across kind of all the functions you oversee, kind of how did you structure your team and what does that look like?
Yeah, definitely. So I came to the commercial operations team from customer success. So my background really is in customer success. And I think I probably take, I'll say, a little bit more of a customer success focused lens to what I do, as opposed to folks that may have come up from, I'll say, like a more pure commercial operations background. So a lot of what I'm doing in structuring my team is making sure that folks are able to answer those data questions, scope effectively, and really kind of take a customer focused approach to everything that we do. So I have a team of two. We work really, really closely together. But yeah, a lot of the stuff that they're focused on is I'll say with that kind of like service-oriented mindset. And then we work with just about every other team at Cleo, whether that is marketing, whether that is customer success, our member operations team, who really drives all of the work that we do to support our members. They're the folks that are actually having calls with members. They're doing those specialist sessions. They're really doing all of the work that makes Cleo the amazing program that it is. And then working with just about every other team kind of in between all of those groups.
I'll stop asking, baseline questions in a second, but this is just to kind of help me get my bearings. How many of your customers are, or how much of your go-to-market motion is like selling in as a benefit to businesses versus, and like, so you're working with kind of either benefits manager or head of people or HR lead or whatever, versus is this also something that like I could just be a subscriber to, or is it purely B2B? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so we're purely B2B. So in terms of kind of who we're working with, it's two groups in that B2B space. One is exactly as you said, Sean, working with that head of HR, people leadership to sell Cleo as a benefit into another organization. We do also work with groups where, let's say, we may be working with a health plan and we're working with that health plan's membership. We may also be working in a reseller context, but overall, all of the work that we do is B2B instead of anything that would be like direct to consumer.
Fascinating. Thank you.
The thing that, so for listener context, Meaghan and I have been chatting a little bit. We did like a fun blog post. The biggest sort of thing that I heard from that is, in like today's sort of like funding environment, economics environment, like our investors, I'll give you just like our context, right? Like, in 2022, when I started this business, like everyone I had the mindset of like money is free, like build cool stuff, people will come. And like the tune very much changes from year to year. It like went to fiscal responsibility, then it went back to growth. And now like with the tariffs and stuff, everyone's like, I'm having a meeting with like our investor team today on like how we like plan for the future. And in sort of like this like rocky environment, I think that like ROI becomes like a pretty big feature. Like it becomes just like more important as like a piece. It's always important, but it like becomes a much more prominent feature of the conversation. With the number of customers you guys have and how many people you guys have to support, like more and more CS teams are being asked to like operate almost at scale. How do you better understand and pass that information back to every CSM when they're in those conversations on like sort of like how the customers are using the product, what benefits they're getting? How do you sort of like use technology to understand like when somebody's at risk versus not?
Definitely. I think a couple things there. First and foremost, is asking good questions. And this is something that I set as a foundation for my work. It's definitely something that I'm sure if my team were here, they would chuckle, because the amount of times that I talk about asking good questions, not being afraid to ask those really detailed questions, is key. Because regardless of how big your team is, if you have one CSM, if you have 100 CSMs, I think the key to being successful there is making sure that you are getting as much information as you can up front to make sure that everybody who is going to be a stakeholder, whether it's CS, whether it's marketing, whether it's your product folks, whomever is really kind of helping to drive the success of that client relationship, that they have all the information that they need to be successful. And so I think there can be a little bit of a hesitancy to ask questions like that sometimes, because I think it's really easy for us to go, okay, I'm going to show up to this first call and I'm going to rock up and look like I know everything, because you don't want to look like you're being caught flat-footed. You don't want to look like you don't know what you're talking about. But I think what separates good from great in that instance, you look at a great CSM or a great salesperson, they are asking questions all the time, and there's not a fear of asking those questions. And so I think kind of first and foremost, when I look at what allows us to be successful, what allows us to kind of get the data to the people that need it, is a comfort in asking questions and making sure that you're asking, I'll say also the right questions too, that you're scoping effectively, so that then you can turn around to all of the teams that you're working with and then say, okay, here's what we need to know, and let's act accordingly on that information that we have.
What I say the right questions piece is what really caught my attention, because I think that all makes sense, right? Like the understanding the context of what your client or customer is dealing with, why they're trying to deal with, what they're trying to accomplish, what winning is, like getting that context is essential for you to A, be able to propose the right solutions, but B, then also position those solutions the right way and make sure they're using the features that will actually be helpful and not just the ones that, sound good. So what are sort of the traits or characteristics of a question that makes it a right question or a good question versus just a question?
I love that question. And I don't say that lightly, because I feel like everybody's like, oh, good question. And they may or may not mean it, but I love that question. I think what makes a really good question is it's a question that gets at the why. Because I think where we can be most successful is understanding what is driving our customers or our prospects to seek out a service like Cleo or anybody else. So those questions that really get at the root of, okay, why is this a pain point for you? Why are we asking for this data? Why are we doing what we're doing? So that then we can really get at the heart of, okay, if you're, let's say, asking for this specific data point because you are getting ROI questions, your board is asking a lot of questions, that's going to help us inform our strategy and make sure that we're supporting you effectively and that we're building that trusting relationship, because we were able to ask those really good questions to get at the heart of, okay, what's the underlying impetus behind the ask that we're getting? And so, a really good question kind of strikes at the heart of, okay, why are we having this conversation? What is driving you to seek those services or anything like that?
That makes a ton of sense. How do you, I guess, and Sean, I guess I'll give you a chance to also ask a follow-up if you've got one. I've got a question teed up, but it's a little different from the question side of questioning.
I think the only other question I would ask is can I have you be my question coach? I'm terrible at asking the right questions. I get something in my head and I'll just kind of spin out and just focus there. And so it's
sometimes I feel like I'm
tough.
afraid of the answer. Sometimes I'm kind of afraid of the answer, where it's oh no, what if they say they don't care? What if they don't get value from it and they've been wasting their time, and me asking the question prompts the fact that they're wasting their time,
or uncovers they're
definitely.
oh, that's what it's supposed to be doing. Yeah, that's not happening at all.
Yeah, you're doing what?
Yeah,
that makes sense.
And it's gonna happen. And I think being okay, and it's easier said than done, because there are sometimes when I know I'm gonna ask a question, I'm I'm not gonna like the answer I'm gonna get 110%. I'm okay, we're bracing for impact, but I'm I would so much prefer to get that out in the open and be all right, we're gonna ask some uncomfortable questions. We're maybe gonna have a less than fun conversation with a client or a prospect, and sometimes it's gonna suck. I'm gonna be totally honest. There are a lot of times where I've wrapped up a call and I'm that was not fun. And I'm like, I'm going to go, order some cookies or like get, my gummy bear stashed in my desk and be like, all right, we're going to take a breather because that was rough. But I think it also builds trust too, that like I have a lot of relationships with clients that I've worked with for a real long time where I'm like, we've had some uncomfortable conversations where I've asked a question. I'm like, I think as we poke at this, we're not going to like the answer, but it builds that trust, especially from a commercial lens. Say, okay, like for those clients that I do have those relationships with, I'm able to have a straightforward conversation with them and they know that I'm not selling them something or that I'm not, pitching anything, that I'm going to give my honest take and that we're okay to maybe have a conversation that does necessitate like ordering some cookies afterward or something like that.
That makes sense. And it also is like, it also builds the trust when you do pitch something where it's like, hey, this isn't a pitch just to try and hit their numbers for the month or for the quarter or whatever. The number of times, I think the amount of times a day we're all pitched things and the number of them that are actually valuable and come from a position of, I understand your business. I understand what you're going through. I understand the pain points you're trying to solve and not just like, oh, you're a marketer. You used to do email marketing. Here's an email tool. And it's like, okay, well, that doesn't help me at all.
Okay, so my follow-up, because we're we're data nerds. I love data. I hate humans. I'm just kidding. My follow-up.
People are data too, or data are people too.
Data are people.
110%.
My follow-up question is like, how do you... I oftentimes hear from like CS teams that one, it's like very difficult to get context as to what questions you should ask. Like this sort of like information problem is pretty big because like you've got like an account manager that's dealing with a customer. You've got like the original salesperson. You've got the CSM. You've got like support. How do you effectively pass information from various parts of the org to a like, right? How do you get that info into one place? Like we're a small team and our head of sales like routinely chastises me for like not using our CRM effectively. Everyone tells me I have to, but as somebody who like takes most of the sales calls for our company, like it's kind of hard considering I've got like 30-minute back-to-backs over and over and over and over again. Like, do you guys pass information about usage to the customer or to the CS team? Like how do you get that? How do you solve the information asymmetry problem, I guess is my question.
Yeah, no, we definitely do. And I have to chuckle about, what we're putting in the CRM or not, because I know there are so many great tools available. And I think regardless of what team you have to take a step back and figure out, okay, with the team that I have, how do they work best? And I know this sounds probably so hypocritical working in CommOps because I spend so much of my day telling people on the flip side of that, like, please put that in the CRM. Like, please let's make sure so that we can do all of our data analysis. So I'm probably going to sound a little hypocritical here, but figuring out what tools work best for your team is so important because if you have a great CRM and you've trained people into the ground, but nobody's using it, that indicates to me that there's a problem with whatever tooling you have in place that you got to figure out, okay, my team maybe doesn't prefer to work in that space. Let's figure out what the best information sharing channel is, whether that is, we actually use Slack in a lot of instances. We realized that we had a lot of questions from our sales team where they're like, hey, with our CRM, stuff might not be working in the way that it's supposed to be. So we said, let's figure out if we can have a Slack channel where our sales team can put all of their CRM questions in one place so that one, our team can see kind of what's coming in, understand what trends we're seeing there. And also, it's a good spot for information sharing too. So let's say one of our salespeople has the same question. I would venture to guess another one of our reps probably was dealing with the same issue yesterday. And so if we can use that as a knowledge repository, that was a really good learning for us because we were like, okay, we're seeing the same questions a lot. We feel like we're, answering the same questions all the time, but having just that channel and going, okay, we're going to step outside of what our typical tools are and figure out what the tooling is that works best for the team we have is super, super important instead of, I think, just kind of forcing people into the box of saying, okay, we have this CRM, you have to work in it all the time forever. Because as much as I love our CRM, as much as I live and breathe data, because data is probably my favorite thing on the face of the planet. I'm like, it's not going to work for everybody. And you're not going to have really good relationships if you don't have the tooling that works the best for people. And that's the one other thing I'll add in terms of how you get that information sharing. It has to start with really good relationship building so that you have that team culture where folks feel comfortable sharing that information with each other, asking questions, that there's not kind of this silo culture where everybody has all these sidebar conversations and the information gets passed that way, because that's not going to work for anybody, regardless of how big your team is. That you have to make sure that it's out in the open and that there are really solid channels for information sharing so that everybody has what they need.
Yeah, and that was that was the greatest 2 minutes, I think, on this podcast. I mean, 100%. The best tool is the one that you actually use. And I think so many people get distracted being like, oh, I want something new. Oh, this is supposed to be better than that. If you aren't going to use the features, then you don't need to pay for the tool. You don't need to bring all that stuff on. Like, a spreadsheet works if that's the only thing that someone will actually use. Slack works if that's what people will actually use. I love that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, prior to coming to Cleo, my early background was in behavioral psych and behavioral therapy. So I think what I'm always looking at is like, okay, what is the antecedent for somebody's behavior? Let's pick apart why someone is engaging in the way that they do. So like, there are times where I'll sit back, drop my headphones, and I'll say, why is someone doing this? Like, why is someone not using this tool? Why is someone not engaging? And so I'm always like trying to maybe overanalyze people. And I'm sure people would say, yes, she does indeed overanalyze people, but it's understanding what is going to work best so that we can kind of drive the work. And if we can pause just a second, I'm going to grab my headphone because it fell out.
It's interesting to think about that question from like an internal dynamics perspective. Of like, why is someone doing this, right? Like, I think across the board, we always catastrophize and assume, so much worse. And if you go back to like Occam's razor, like, it's just take the simplest approach of like, hey, they don't know the tool. They're busy. They don't want to take the time. They don't want to learn it. They don't want to ask for help. Whatever. They're not going to read. And so that, yes, you have great help docs and you have internal documentation, but I don't want to search for all of those. And so if you don't have an easy way for me to search, I'm not going to use it. I'll just ask a friend, whatever. It is wild how fast we can overcomplicate things because you don't effectively ask why.
Yeah, no, 110%. And you bring up a really good point about kind of the, I think this is in maybe like civil engineering, but people talk about like a happy path where you'll have all of these sidewalks that are built out and then you'll see a big patch of grass that's been walked over because people figured out the easier way to get from point A to B. And so anytime I see sidebars or, kind of, I hate saying whisper networks because I'm like, that just seems like kind of sinister, but I'm like, if we ever see people engaging in a non-standard way, I'll say that. Then I'm like, okay, what is the issue with the standard way that is making people go to the non-standard way? And then I'm like, okay, what can we do as a team, especially on the operations side? Because so much of what we do is enablement and it's making your job easier to the extent that we can, absent the CRM updates, because I know everybody's like, no, that makes my day harder every single day of the week. And we feel that. But other than that, I think it's understanding if I'm seeing a lot more non-standard usage, non-standard channels of communication, that's our responsibility to kind of take a step back and go, all right, if that's how people are engaging, what can we do with our standard tools to get them as close to the non-standard, again, that people are engaging with? Because that's how we're going to get the best engagement with whatever we're asking people to do.
I'm going to ask the AI question.
Oh, yeah.
Where do you see like AI fitting into this? Because I think that's one of the things it might be uniquely positioned to do. And I know we're still kind of in the early days, but kind of curious to see if you thought about that at all.
Oh, yeah. It is unsurprisingly something that I think of.
Have you thought about it at all?
No, I actually don't think about AI. It's never come up for me ever.
Has it ever been shoved in your face? Of daily.
Oh, daily. And it has been really helpful in some instances. Well, like when we look at, okay, like let's say an AI summary of a call. Those have been incredibly helpful for our teams, especially if, let's say, you're on a call with a ton of people and we don't want to deputize somebody to take notes, anything like that, that you're able to use that summary and then it's able to go to every single person on the call. So everybody is able to get the same summary. Everybody's able to get that information and do with it what you wish. There are also lots of other things that we look at from a commercial tooling standpoint. This is where I'm always hesitant to say, okay, we're going to, aim tools at the problem, let's say, but there is a lot of really exciting AI, especially in terms of sentiment analysis, taking a look at kind of where those pain points might be, so that, to my point earlier about asking those really good questions, we are always going to have people that are able to ask those really good questions to get at the heart of, what people really care about and what their motivations are. But with a lot of that commercial tooling, looking at things like sentiment analysis, overall data analytics that we can use to inform those questions that we're asking, that's huge. And so it's something that I think about daily, just in terms of how can I make our teams more efficient so that they're functionally able to operate at top of license, let's say, so they're not spending time hunting through all of these notes, that they're not reading through all of these call transcripts, that they're able to quickly and efficiently get the information that they need in order to ask those questions and in order to support our clients as effectively as possible.
Wow. That makes a ton of sense. Where does that information live? Do you feel like the best integration there is between the sort of quote standard tooling that you talked about and passing the information back to the non-standard formats? Do we see it as more of a pipeline object, or do you feel I don't know, Salesforce finally gets dethroned for the next greatest thing?
I think everybody is so reliant on CRMs like Salesforce. I'll be totally honest, I don't think they're going anywhere, because they are a wealth of information. And when they're used correctly, there is so much that you can do with those tools that I don't think it makes sense to say, okay, something like that is going to get dethroned. However, going back to looking at how your team functions, looking at how people gather information, there is a lot to be done in translating all of the data that you have in your CRMs to make sure that you're able to share that information in the best way possible. So I think it's the best way I can frame it is how do we bridge that gap? How are we either using our CRM for that information sharing, whether people have access to that CRM, that's what we're doing, or how can we use that CRM, still keep the vast majority of our data in there, but then distill it down to whatever reporting, whether that's a spreadsheet, whether that's a one-pager. That's something that our team does quite a bit, is when we look at especially exec summary reporting. We don't want to be sending our C-suite into Salesforce. That's not going to work. There's too much noise in that data. But what can we do with all the great data that's in there to distill it down and put together reporting that is going to be much more easily consumed by somebody who potentially has 5 minutes to get the overview of what they need to know before they head into a board meeting?
I guess switching gears a little bit, where do you see that information being passed back into growth, right? You guys are a growing company, a growing business. How do you sort of take that information then and distribute it to other orgs, right? There's product, there's marketing. Who do you kind of work most with? Because you're kind of the CEO of the customer, right? You understand the most about the sort of current customer base and where they're getting value and what they care about. And sort of taking that, the simplest form is you can think about it as a case study where it's hey, this customer uses this way. Let's talk about it in a direct fashion. But there's so many teams that then have to take that information and funnel it back into the rest of the biz. Who do you find yourself working with most, and how?
Yeah. So it's funny that you say that, because a lot of what commercial operations does, we really work super cross-functionally with just about every team at the business. So I am meeting multiple times a week with our product team, with member operations, with marketing, with our RevOps team, with data, really making sure that we are able to share that information effectively across all parties. And in terms of kind of how we share that information best, same principles as I mentioned for kind of that, getting information to our CS team. You have to figure out how your team works best. You have to figure out who the stakeholders in the room are. And in that kind of cross-functional space, you also have to figure out how each of those individual teams consume that information. Because I have one way that I give updates to my ComOps team. CS has a different way they share those updates. Product has a different way they share those updates. So as we're looking at working cross-functionally, I think one of the best things we can do is understand how each of those teams work individually, so that when we're having those conversations at a higher level to say, okay, this is information that needs to get disseminated now across the entire organization, not just, commercial operations and CS, that you're really understanding how those communications channels work across teams, so that you can say, all right, if I have this customer pain point, that we're able to share that at a high level, and that we feel really comfortable in the fact that that information is going to get disseminated appropriately to all of the different individual team members that may need it.
That makes a ton of sense. And how do they what's the primary utilization of that information? Like, where do you find that it's provides the most leverage?
Yeah. So, couple different things there. In the work that we do, a lot of the best use for that information is, let's say we have a certain product pain point, or we're hearing that we have a lot of members that are coming to our platform that are looking for a certain type of support that they may not be getting, or conversely, that we do have available that folks might not be aware of. And so it's working across those teams, whether it is, let's say we'll take the example of a feature that we actually do have available, but members might not be as aware of, that we would need to be able to talk to our member operations team to make sure that our guides are able to effectively signpost to that information. We're talking to our marketing team to figure out how our enrollment marketing materials can effectively signpost to that information. We're talking to our product team to understand how in our interface we can make sure that that information is better highlighted. So that's really, I think, kind of where we see, I'll say, the strongest use case for that information sharing. But it really depends on kind of what pain point we're seeing, and then kind of how we're disseminating across. If it's something where we're like, hey, there's a really big user issue, there's a bug, there's a glitch that's really going to significantly impact the member experience, that's going to be a very different communication channel than the situation that I just described, where we've got something that folks actually can take advantage of, but we just want to make sure that we're highlighting that better for our member population.
How have you seen sort of like the landscape change over the course of the time that you've been with Cleo, and where do you see, what changes have you had to make?
Yeah, definitely. Changes internally, or changes more so with us as a company, or D, all of the above?
The customer base, like the customer base, and the sort of the people that you sell into.
Yeah, that's been honestly probably one of the biggest areas of change that I've seen. I think when I first started at Cleo, and I've been at Cleo for just about 4 years, a little less, we really, to your point earlier, we were selling into a space where, frankly, capital was cheaper. A lot of people, it was a no-brainer to have a lot of these caregiving benefits, and that there wasn't as much push on ROI because it was an easier sell, quite frankly, just because of the economic conditions at that point. And then as we've evolved over the past couple years, what we've seen now is that there's absolutely still a lot of business in the employer space, but we're also seeing shift to the health plan space. We're seeing shift to groups where, potentially 4 years ago, we may not have been having as many of those conversations, but now we're saying, okay, health plans really see value in providing these kinds of services to their members. And so on the operations, on the customer success side of that, we've needed to adapt to say, okay, we're really comfortable with what our customer base looks like. How do we shift our operations? What changes do we need to make so that we can ensure that we are effectively serving clients that might look a little bit different in terms of org structure, in terms of their key needs, than our kind of core original customer base did?
All right, Meaghan, I think with that, it's probably a good time to wrap up. Anything you want to pub, any parting words, any place where our listeners can find you to get more, just learn more about Cleo, learn more about you?
Yeah, definitely. Always recommend folks check out highcleo.com, which is going to be Cleo's site. We have a ton of really exciting content, lots of different pieces that just got released, specifically an article on our Family Health Index, which is kind of how we measure caregiver burnout. It's really the foundation of all of the support work that we do for our members. So highcleo.com is the best place to take a look. And for myself personally, I think there will be a couple other pieces on my own work implementation wise that will be coming out on the site soon as well. So definitely recommend folks check that out.
Incredible. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you both. It's been a ton of fun. Always happy to chat about good question asking data. This has been a blast. So thanks for having me on.
All right. See you again soon.